All right, today's lesson is opposite numbers. And so let's begin here with number one. When you talk about opposite numbers, this is what you need to think. They are two numbers where their sum is zero. In other words, when you add them up, what's the result? It's zero. If you'll look off to the right here, my helium atom model. If you look over here, let me try to explain the concept of opposite numbers using this helium atom model. All right, inside the nucleus of an atom, there are protons and neutrons. And the number of protons actually tells you what the atom is. And so this atom has two protons, these two plus signs inside. It also has two neutrons. But the fact that there are two protons is what makes it helium. Now, the charge of each proton is a positive 1. There are two of them, for a total charge of +2. Now, orbiting the nucleus are electrons. This particular helium atom has 2 electrons. The charge of each of those 2 electrons is a -1 for a total charge of -2. Now, this atom is not an ion. And if you remember what an ion is an atom with an electrical charge. This atom has no electrical charge, therefore the overall charge of this atom is 0. Excuse me. And the reason is this. The two protons cancel out the charge of the 2 electrons. And the final result is 0. 2 positives and 2 negatives equals 0. Listen, that's exactly the concept of opposite numbers. Two numbers where the sum is 0. So if we'll take a look and go through, let's work quickly through some of these problems that we have here. So A says 9 plus what would equal 0? And that would be a -9, right? 9 plus -9 equals 0. Look to the right there for B, -2 plus what would equal 0? In that case would be a 2. Go down to C. Hey, if you have a fraction or a decimal, it doesn't really matter. 6.5, what's its opposite? -6.5, right? Because that equals 0. Are you catching on the fact that the numerical value is the same, but one's positive and one's negative? That's the idea of opposite numbers. So how about D? What would you do with that? N plus what is going to equal 0? Say, Mr. Scarver, we haven't done variables. That's okay. Look, math's all about applying principles that you've learned to new situations. So hopefully you say, hey, no problem. N plus -n equals 0. Of course, right? Makes sense? It should. That's the idea. That's the concept. Okay. Well, there's also another way of thinking of opposite numbers, right? There's another aspect. You could also think of them this way. Opposite numbers are also the same distance from 0 on a number line. So opposite numbers are also the same distance from 0 on a number line. So we have a number line here. And I've got the two opposite numbers. I've got -3 and I've got +3, right? And they are opposite numbers. Well, we'll notice on the number line that they are the same distance from 0, all right? But they're on opposite sides. So let's plot the -3. I'll put a point on the -3. And I'm just going to figure out its distance to 0, and it's 1, 2, 3, right? A -3 is 3 away from 0. Let's do our 3, dot on the 3. What is that distance? And that is also 3, right? So opposite numbers. What are they? Numbers that are the same distance from 0 on the number line, right? Just another way of thinking about our opposite numbers. All right, so F. The opposite of a number is also called, it has a definite term here, and it's called the additive inverse. Additive inverse. So, for example, what would be the additive inverse or the opposite of -12? And hopefully you say, oh, that's easy, that would be 12, right? What's the additive inverse of 5? -5. What's the additive inverse of -3/2? +3/2. Got it? All right. Second concept today, and that's the concept of absolute value. Absolute value. All right, so what is absolute value? Now, don't get absolute value confused with opposite numbers. It's different. Absolute value is the distance a number is away from 0. That's the idea. Now, if you look to the left here, you'll see, oops, I hate when I do that. If you look to the left here, you'll see these two vertical lines and the -4 in between. All right, it's not a touchdown, it's not field goal, but it is the symbol for absolute value. And when you see that, you have to think, hey, what's the distance that this number is away from 0? All right, so it's pretty easy to figure out. Let's go ahead and do our number line. I'm going to plot the -4. So I put a point on the -4 on the number line, and I'm going to figure out how far away is that from 0. 1, 2, 3, 4. And indeed, a -4 is 4 away from 0. So what is the absolute value of -4? It is 4. Now, absolute value is an operation, just like addition is an operation, just like multiplication is an operation. It's an operation. It's telling you to perform something upon the numbers, all right? And so what you're performing is figuring out the distance from that number to 0. Now, you need to be careful in some situations. Let me get rid of my screen here, my shade. You have to be careful because I see a lot of people with the second example, they think of it as opposite numbers, and it's not. Remember, they're different. Absolute value is the distance the number is away from 0. So how far away from 0 is 4? Well, again, if I plot 4 on the number line, and I'm just using the number line as an illustration. This isn't how we're going to do absolute value. They're very, very simplistic. How far away are we? 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm just trying to show you indeed why the value is the value. So how far away from 0 is 4? It's 4 away, and that is also 4. So the absolute value of -4 is 4. The absolute value of +4 is 4. The distance the number is away from 0. And here's a key concept. Distance is always positive. Distance is always positive. If you'll keep that in mind, you'll be in good shape in those kinds of situations. Okay, let's go ahead and deal with the second aspect here. Do a couple example problems. All right, let's solve each. And if you want to, you can pause the video in between each one and try to think of it yourself, or you can just work right along. Some of these are pretty simplistic. So number 1, absolute value of -7 is, and I hope you're thinking, right? Look, the key is, as I'm trying to instruct you, you have to be thinking. So I hope you're thinking. Absolute value of -7 is 7. All right, move to the right. Number 2, absolute value of 19 is, and you're thinking 19, right? Number 3, a decimal. Who cares, right? Apply the principle. Absolute value of -5.17, 5.17. Hey, this is pretty easy. And number 4, absolute value of 0. All right, well, 0 doesn't have a plus or minus. It's simply 0. All right? D. All right, one other thought here with absolute value. Before taking the absolute value, all operations inside the absolute value symbol must be performed. So be careful there. Before taking the absolute value, all operations inside the absolute value must be performed. This is kind of like an order of operations. And we're going to talk about order of operations later on in the chapter. But in the meantime, just please understand that you have to perform all operations inside, all right, before taking the absolute value. So let's work a few of these problems. So if you look at number 1, what is the absolute value of 12 minus 3? So you want to do the 12 minus 3 first, right? Perform the operation of subtraction. We get now the absolute value of 9. And what is that? 9, right? Because 9 is 9 away from 0. Number 2 there to the right, we all know 24 divided by 6 is 4. And therefore the absolute value of 4 is 4. See how I'm first performing the operation and then taking the absolute value? All right, so up to this point, you might say this. Okay, hey, absolute values always end up positive. All right, well, technically, the absolute value of any number is positive because distance is always positive. But the math can have a little bit more to it. So look at number 3. In number 3, we need to perform this absolute value first. What is the absolute value of -7? And I hope you're saying 7. But look at what we have already. We have a negative outside of the absolute value symbol. And therefore that negative is still there. And therefore our final answer on this one is a -7. Now the absolute value, the distance was positive, but now we have a negative sign in front of it. And we'll talk about opposites and stuff later on in the chapter as well. But that thing ends up -7. As you can see, that's what's going to happen in number 4, right? We have minus the absolute value of 30. The absolute value of 30 is 30, but we still have this minus outside for a grand total of negative 30. All right, so two concepts. The concept of opposite numbers, remember, two numbers where their sum is 0. And then the aspect of absolute value. Absolute value is the distance a number is away from 0.